Hey, this is Tyrese Anderson. What I want to talk about right now is a question that a lot of people have right now with the Tyre Nichols situation. Now, for the Tyrese Nichols situation, or yeah, let's just say Tyrese Nichols situation, or however you pronounce it, the question that comes up because of the fact of the nature of the cops who arrested him and brutalized him, the question that has come up is because since the cops were black, was the situation that happened at Tyre Nichols, beating, Tyre Nichols beating, I should say, was it racially motivated, to put it bluntly? Is a question that a lot of people have, and for this video, I'll answer it. So, when it comes to answering a question of whether Tyre Nichols beating was racially motivated or not, the $1 million question, the simple answer to that question is simply put it, yes, it was racially motivated. Now, it might sound crazy to most people because the people who clearly were involved in the beating were black. So it kind of goes against the idea of, yeah, how was this racially motivated? But the simple answer to that question is simply down to the fact of how cops are trained and how they think. Now, the truth of the matter is, anyone who knows anything about American history, particularly American history compared to any other Western developed nation, knows that the police have a history of racism. They have a history of racism going all the way back to the 1960s when they used to mistreat African Americans. They used to have dogs chasing after them, spraying them with water hoses, all that type of stuff. They did some very horrible, terrible things to the African American community, okay? That is already well established. Not to mention in recent decades, they still have a history of racism. One of the officers, for example, in the Rodney King situation, who beat up Rodney King in 1992, wrote a book. Actually, from what I've heard, and I'm certain there's some truth to this, talking about how to beat up black people or something along the lines of that. I'm not making this up. You know, this is actually a fact, to put it bluntly, okay? Not to mention anyone who hasn't been living on a rock, even just being around your local peers in your local school and all that type of stuff, knows that the police are racist. Everyone knows it. It's not a secret. Anyone who tries to pretend that it's a secret is not fooling anyone. Everyone knows it. To put it bluntly, it's an open secret. It's not something but everyone says, but everyone knows. They are disproportionately biased towards black people, in all honesty. Okay? So if you have officers, even if they're black, who are put in a place where they're being exposed to that level of hatred all the time, all the time, and you also have to realize that not all black people love themselves and view themselves equal to white people. It even comes down to the term Uncle Tom, house, nigga, and all that type of stuff, which I'm certain even people who are not very familiar with black culture and stuff are familiar with those terms. I think we've all heard those terms before, for a black person who's a love themselves. So the truth of the matter is, when it comes to how that even applies to the Tyre Nichols situation, is simply due to the fact that it shows that just because they're black does not necessarily mean that they don't hate their own people. So the whole argument, well, they're black, so it doesn't change anything, doesn't necessarily apply. Not to mention, back to the point I was previously making, about the fact that they're in an environment where they're trained to see their own people in a bad light, which I'm certain hasn't stopped anytime soon since it's been going on for so long in the police department. It's not hard to believe that they were brainwashed, whether they, brainwashed, whether they had these beliefs before or 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 only after they join a police force. Whatever the case of the matter is, I'm certain that way of thinking has impacted the way they see their own community of people. So that's my first point. I have to simply say, okay, so if you're obviously in a place that has that much hatred and not much hatred towards black people, of course you're gonna somehow absorb some of that way of thinking. Okay? So that's the first thing I have to say. The second point I have to make when it comes to the Tyre Nichols beating is simply due to the fact of the matter of who was targeted. Now, of course, there's no complete certain way to completely prove, okay, was this completely racially motivated? Like anything in life, even the most certain things, you will always have at the most 99% certainty this is true versus 100% certainty. So who knows, maybe it's just a case of police brutality. But anyway, back to the point, when it comes to the person who was targeted, the person who was targeted in this situation was a young black person. The question I have is, would they have done this to someone who was like a skinny young white person, a young white male? Would they have done this to um a young white female? Even worse, would they have just beaten the crap out of her over something as petty as simply not indicating their car signal when they were driving? No. You know, you want to know why? Because there's obviously an image problem. Because the truth of the matter is, when white people carry on and cause problems and all that sort of stuff, people just simply think in their head, oh, he's just acting that way. He's just going through a phase. He's just a punk, but eventually he'll grow out of it. Blah 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 blah. You know what you've heard a million times. I'm certain if you follow topics like this, and just in general, I've been around for that matter. People tend to have this notion in general that white people, when they act up and they cause problems, they're just going through a phase. They're just going through a phase like, oh, I'm young, I'm just acting this way because, because I'm young, I'm this and that. So that's an image problem. Besides, there's not much talk about crime, young white men committing crime like there is about our community. Not to mention, white females are not known for being associated with street crime as well either. So, due to the fact of this constant, you know, particularly by the media, this constant depiction of black males as being criminals and being gangbangers and all that type of stuff, the idea that somehow that hasn't contributed to the image of them more naturally assuming that he's going to be dangerous, he's going to be a threat and stuff, is simply foolishness. It's simply foolishness to believe that that hasn't contributed to it. Since out of those two groups, easily, white men and white females, and even any other group of people, he tends to, because of the person he tends to be more likely to be associated with being a gang member. So it's an image problem. So that obviously makes it more believable. Yes, this was really racially motivated. So the idea that this was not, and it was just because there are black cops or something like that, is simply foolishness. Besides, it's a known fact that the police sometimes, send black cops to do the work for them because they don't want to be considered racist. If anything, this is nothing new. This even goes back to the history of slavery. Sometimes the white people wouldn't do the stuff, they would get a black person to do the stuff. So this whole notion that somehow this wasn't racially motivated is definitely, to say that it's complete, there's no evidence whatsoever just because the people who did it were black, is complete foolishness. It's a possibility, and not even a possibility, a very high possibility it was racially motivated. So this is my video. Um, about the Tyre Nichols situation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video and like videos like this, remember to thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. And this is all I have to say. And simply put it, later.